welcome everyone. Welcome to those in the room. Welcome to any of our participants on Zoom who are watching this remotely. It's my pleasure to introduce the Pride Lecture at the OII this year. I remember being at the OII probably about 5 or 6 years, maybe 2014, 2015. And Dame Stephanie Shirley, one of the early benefactor of the OII, asked me, what are our traditions? And so that a place should have traditions. And I didn't really have a good answer for that. But now the Pride Lecture is in its 2nd year. So I think that's a good way to think about maybe starting this as a form of a tradition. And I hope it is that case. Pride itself has gone through many transformations from protest to parade, from politics to practice. It's not a settled issue or a settled understanding even. Just earlier we were asking, is the Q in LGBTQ, is it queer or questioning? And, depending on the context and the point of history, it might be one or the other. So, what we think are closed chapters are sometimes rewritten with new characters. And with new technologies, we have both the means of finding and organizing, but also representing ourselves differently. As academics, we often study representation, but today we get an insight on how such representation happens out in the media that we would study ourselves, and some of its considerations and some of its challenges. So I'm delighted here for that to have Andreas, sorry, is it Finzel?
It's Finzel.
It's Finzel.
You're killing it. Go on.
No, all right, great. Yes, thank you, Andreas. Yeah, having it here with us today to zoom in on the impact on LGBTQ lives from growing representation and affirmation in popular media towards issues like bias and security threats. Now, Andreas is an Oxford alum. He's worked for TV networks, Paramount and Nickelodeon, before recently moving to the tech side of streaming services like Netflix and helping them advising on advertising. He holds an MBA from the Saïd Business School here at Oxford, as well as a BA in media management from Breda University. Now, since moving to the UK in 2021, I heard you've also become an enthusiastic rower. You're in the right place for sure. So now for your awareness, both here in the audience and at home, the presentation is being recorded. And it'll be posted on our website following the event, should you want to share it or otherwise review the event. But I will note that the discussion is not going to be recorded. So after the presentation, we'll stop that. And that's partially as an issue of sensitivity. If you have particular questions on this topic, we'd like to encourage a safe space for you to be able to ask those questions. So if you're joining us online, feel free to put your questions into the Q&A box. We can see it up here and I'll be able to moderate those questions. Or you can even raise your hand and we can try the audio and you can ask it live yourself. And so we'll be able to check that out at the questions, but that's then. Until then, for the next 30 minutes or so, Andreas, the show is yours. It's great to have you. Please welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
That was very eloquent. You should do this longer. 30 minutes and I can go home. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the OII for creating a space and a stage for creators. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks, Ellen, for organizing, if you hear this. And thank you all for coming. I'm Andreas Finzel. My pronouns are he and him. And I will be referring to LGBTQ plus people as queer, just to make it shorter. Maybe to start off with a quick anecdote. I'm from a small town in Germany called Pickford. And I have a really religious background, so where I come from, there were no queer people. I distinctly remember the first time I saw a gay guy in real life. Me and my parents were visiting a family friend who lived in a mental asylum. And down the hallway was a young man cuddling a plush toy. And on the way back, my mom told me that guy. And I don't think she meant anything bad. She was just as fascinated as I was to see one in real life. So I got out of there. I studied media in the Netherlands, India, and Indonesia. Started working for people like Paramount and Nickelodeon in Germany. And then had an incredible privilege to study in the University of Oxford at the train station, the business school. And ever since then, I worked in a tech company called Magnite, and we work with streaming services like Disney and Netflix to place ads. So my work is a lot around what data do we have on people watching streaming services and how can we use it to target ads. Today, I want to spend some time discussing the changes that I see happening in the media thanks to AI, the impacts on queer people, and a couple of thoughts on what a more queer future could look like. Starting off with a video, a song.
So happy that my child made it to the big thing. One step closer to can't see me in my last name. You feel like you ain't worthy. You can call me Mrs. Delivery. I'm flying from Japan to be seen with the man who loses. So dirty. If you ain't free, I want to. Been down the aisle, see I do. We can celebrate with the midfield kiss. We hit the church with the fake Elvis. You come near me, the score. Charlie, I believe there's more than you.
Who's a Swiftie? The Swiftie, though, you probably realize it's not actually a Taylor Swift song, but completely made up. And wonderfully, not just using her voice and her beat, but also the stories of her life that we know. What I'm alluding to is that with generative AI, it's easier than ever before to create content. And we've all seen it for image as a text, but it's increasingly true for music as well. At the same time, we see machine learning and algorithm controlling the way we consume media and what we see in our feeds. And then thirdly, AI disrupts traditional business models in the media space. So I'm going to spend a bit more time on each of these three. As I said, we see generative AI preparing
We have
music
a
and text,
corgi
and we
wearing
also have more
sunglasses
videos.
walking on the beach of a tropical island. And here it shows that it has multi-resolution support. So the first one is horizontal, next we can have it square, but it can also generate vertical, as you can see here. And again, notice the waves, super realistic. The shadow of the corgi, also very realistic. It does follow the corgi as it walks.
So that's from Kling, a Chinese company trying to compete with Sora from OpenAI. I think we all have this one friend who says, I'd like to have a dog if it doesn't have to take care of it. Maybe we're getting closer to this than we think. And we see more and more examples now of computer games or interactive media incorporating AI in one way or another. And because of this, the amount of media available to consume is skyrocketing. As a proxy, we are looking here at the number of videos being uploaded to YouTube. So this is actually the last couple of years, so like a pre-Gen AI period, and we see user-generated content driving this steep curve. And with Gen AI, we expect the growth to continue exponentially. And at the same time, it's getting harder to trust what we see, because it's more difficult to understand if it was a person who did it or a model. Especially in a year of elections, the Wired magazine is tracking the use of AI in the media connected to elections across the world, most frequently occurring in India, the US, Pakistan, and Mexico. We made it through the Indian and Taiwanese and European and Mexican elections so far. And with all controversy, we haven't broken down yet. Let's see how the US do. Here's a wonderful example out of India, a Tamil-speaking politician, Vasantha Kumar, who passed away from COVID, but was resurrected for his campaign.
அதில் நீங்கள் நம்பிக்கை கொள்ளும் அளவிற்கு பணியாற்றினேன். இவ்வேளையில் 2020ஆம் ஆண்டு கொரோனா என்னும் பெருந்தொற்று உலகையே புரட்டி போட்டதால் மக்களின் இயல்பு வாழ்க்கை ஸ்தம்பித்தது.
My Tamil is a little rusty, but if I understand correctly, he's actually explaining how he passed from COVID, but how he still hopes for a better future for India. And not just generative AI, also very traditional machine learning and algorithm are shaping how we consume media. Obviously, this is not new, but it's interesting to understand that some of the trends having an impact have been going on for 10 years or so. So thanks to algorithmic pages like the For You page on on TikTok or the Explore page on Instagram, our own consumption is being personalized. And that means that we all see different things. And it also means that we might have a different experience of what's real or what's cool. And these platforms are increasingly picking up different inputs from more advanced data sets to serve us either content or recommendations or advertising. So the same way TikTok would try to recommend a video, people like me are tracking on what you people are doing to target ads, and I hope we can predict what people will shop for. And both of these things lead to AI disrupting traditional media business models. So here we have an example of a California-based queer artist, Paul Richmond, who felt like Lenser AI, based on Midjourney, is replicating his art without his consent and without financial compensation for him. And on a much larger scale, we see news publishers around the world where we're worried that the Google AI overview is going to reduce web traffic to their websites, and with that, ad revenues. We see the first lawsuits happening from the Financial Times or Scarlett Johansson, and it kind of illuminates how the copyright situation is just a big question mark. Nobody knows who holds copyright for what a generative AI model produces, and whether or not Scarlett Johansson would actually have a legal claim to financial things, if it was her voice or not, we don't know. And while the courts are literally still out on this, we see a couple of licensing deals happening between people like OpenAI and news publishers in an attempt to include the industry or avoid litigation, or maybe both. But the opacity of AI makes it difficult for stakeholders to engage. We don't know what has been scraped to create data to train models. We don't know how exactly the input into a model affects the outputs. And without the chance to attribute an output back to the original creator of a news article, it's difficult to contribute financial incentives. And that leads to a future where a big part of the economic value is being captured by very few companies building models, rather than a larger community of creators or media companies. And that is just part of the bigger trend that big tech is eating Hollywood for breakfast. So here we see market cap of big tech companies and media companies. I used to look for Paramount. They already lost like 20% in the last 10 days. While NVIDIA grew by like, I don't know, a couple of billions as they do. And to sum up the impacts of generative AI in creating content, machine learning and controlling content, and business models disrupting, we are seeing our media economy consolidating while our media culture is fragmented. Now, what does that mean for queer people? So I want to look at the impacts for queer people through 4 different lenses: identity, community, privacy, and security. Let's start with identity. I was 10 when Brokeback Mountain came out, and it was a huge deal. I remember my dad jumping off the sofa and leaving the room, and the only scene that was remotely interesting. And back then, people couldn't understand how a studio could spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a queer story. But with generative AI, we will see hundreds of millions of queer stories, and it's never been easier to find yourself represented in popular media around you. And even more interestingly, we see some people actively using generative AI to affirm their own beliefs and identity.
For many trans people, childhood photos stay packed away.
Ich schaue meine Kinderfotos nie an. Ich habe zu Hause auch keine Kinderfotos von mir.
Es ist eine Sache, die habe ich hinter mir gelassen, mit der möchte ich nicht in Verbindung gebracht werden. wenn ich alte Kinderfotos angeschaut habe, dann war das immer so, dass ich da halt einfach so einen Typen sehe.
Eine Freundin hatte letztens so eine Babyparty geschmissen und wir sollten alle unsere Kinderfotos mitnehmen und ich habe dieser Babyparty halt abgesagt, weil mir das unangenehm war.
Today, we bring childhood memories back into the light with the power of AI. The AI reimagined the photographs, being trained with pictures of how the person appears today. Gender cues were reduced and facial features subtly adjusted, while special care was taken to retain original details of every precious memory.
Oh wow.
Krass, ey.
Da hätte ich nicht gedacht, dass das so perfekt geändert wird.
Und ich finde es mega schön.
Vorher war auch schon alles richtig. So, nur halt leider noch nicht auf der Oberfläche.
Ich weiß nicht, ob ihr es kennt, wenn ihr so ein Stück habt, was einfach fehlt in euch. Beim Anblick habe ich so ein bisschen das Gefühl, dass diese Lücke ein bisschen geschlossen wurde.
Everyone has the right to be seen as who they truly are. Saved memories.
Wonderful. We Germans are not usually known to be touching. But of course, generative AI is not actually creating anything, but it's replicating based on what we feed it. And with that comes the difficulty of biases being replicated in the data. Here we see a queer artist, Reese Rogers, who used Midjourney to create all kinds of different queer people, from non-binary to transgender to queer professions, and he noticed that all of them had pink hair. That could either be an issue of data not being represented or simply not being labeled correctly. If we look at a future where media is more and more generated by AI, we probably see more of biases against queer people, and we see more stereotypically depictions of queer people. So we see that they're all quite young, they're all really attractive, a lot of them are male. But what shocks me most is that all of them are white. Because clearly, if we look at pictures of openly queer people, they're more frequently found in Western societies. But if we imagine a future without or with an underrepresentation of ethnically diverse queer people, we risk to diminish the power of media to normalize queer lives, especially in those regions where we need it more. I don't think we need more queer people like Nick and Charlie. I think we need more queer people like Donnie and Tim. And more for fun, there's some examples of the AI just getting it entirely wrong. So I'm not making this up. Somebody asked Gemini if there's queer people in Mario Kart. And she came back with, yes, there are many gay characters in Mario Kart, including, I'm just going to meet all my favorites. Yoshi, a tender, non-binary lesbian. And that's my favorite, Wario, a sassy, messy, polyamorous bottom, who some say is a drag impersonator of Mario. The last part, I see what he's doing. So on the one hand, clearly the AI has no idea of the factual basis here. It just understands what words and descriptions are being used in a queer context. And at the same time, the nuances of queer culture are completely lost. So while Yoshi might decide to share with his friends and employer that he is non-binary in his identity, it's less likely that Wario would describe himself as a polyamorous bottom in a situation like this. And I'm not sure if labeling data better is going to solve that issue. Moving from identity to communities. So as you said earlier, machine learning plays an increasing role in how we consume media and how media is being governed. That can mean that we can use moderation tools powered by AI to remove hate speech. That's wonderful, that's good. But the same tools can be used to censor gay voices, like we can see with chatbots in Russia and China, no longer talking about queer people the way they should. And these algorithms can also create echo chambers, where there might be a part of the internet where everybody feels really queer and welcome, and another part of the internet where anti-queer sentiment lives, without the chance of a dialogue or a normalization between those two. And looking at how we understand audiences, privacy can be paramount in a queer context. So here we have examples of Facebook ads targeting trans and queer people. And predictive algorithms might lead to people being outed before they are ready to share with the environment that they are queer. And we see more and more anecdotal evidence of people seeing these ads before they decide to come out themselves. I remember being a teenager and seeing ads on Facebook that I did not understand. Anybody else? That didn't work the way I expected. And with models being more sophisticated, it's getting harder to understand what data is being used to make assumptions on our audiences. So I mean, Facebook knows who you're liking and what you're watching and maybe who you're connected with, but a more sophisticated model could even use biometrics like your face or your voice to make assumptions on your sexuality or gender identity. And automated gender recognition is clearly undermining non-binaries possibilities to identify in a different way than what a machine would think of you. For some of us, this might feel like an invasion of privacy, but for other people, it can be a matter of safety. Here's an example from the Middle East.
I'm transgender woman and was sentenced to 3 years in prison in Egypt.
تم الحكم علي ب6 أشهر سجن، قضيت منهم 19 يوم.
تم اعتقالي في المملكة العربية السعودية وحكم علي بالسجن من 10 أشهر ودفع غرامة مالية $2600 ثم الترحيل لليمن حيث هناك كانت حياتي مهددة في الخطر. I'm a victim of digital targeting in the Middle East and North Africa region.
So what these folks are referring to as digital targeting is about policemen manually going through your phone and looking at pictures, chats, ads, or contacts that suggest that somebody might have conducted themselves in a behavior deemed illegal in a specific country. But it's easy to imagine how a model, instead of a policeman with a phone in his hand, could increase such targeting tactics by a factor of 1,000. And as these models get more complex, it's harder for us to understand what data could be used against queer people. So it's no longer about who has downloaded Grindr in Egypt. It's more about, is there specific patterns in music consumption? Are there specific contacts in your phones? And it's harder to understand where somebody should be careful. And of course, governments get the chance to dictate to tech companies how to behave. This could start with little things like blocking specific TV shows in countries. When I was at Nickelodeon, Hungary banned some of our shows on the TV because they portrayed 2 men giving a lunchbox to a kid. But it could also lead to censorship. Or, and that's what I'm most scared of, it could one day lead to governments mandating tech companies to hand over personal data. Just imagine how the data trail we leave behind is permanent. But governments are so shaky and changing so quickly. We see some advances on the privacy side from tech companies like Apple Intelligence, but those come at a price tag. And luckily for us, in Western societies, we see a lot of regulation happening in the space that really does help. GDPR makes transparent what data companies had collected on you. The Digital Services Acts make transparent how algorithms are used to target ads and protect vulnerable communities like children better. And the European AI Act is probably going to block all use of biometric applications to infer things like sexuality. And still, we already see generative AI being used to spur hate speech. Here we have an example from a US Pride March where this gentleman's shirt was altered to say trans kids are sexy, insinuating that gays are pedophiles and that we should protect our children from these people. And we see depictions of queer people being used in election campaigns to blackmail or to smear opposition. So here we have a video of Joe Biden as Dylan Mulvaney.
And so it's Friday night, I'm getting ready to go out, but before I go out, I God forgive you. And the only way I can regain is with language. And ice cold Bud Light, so good.
I think it's fine, it's okay to laugh. But obviously, gay people are not complimented here. Like they're portrayed as an issue and affiliated with this politician to do something. And there's another example of this, of Zelensky as a belly dancer. Also in a gay safe world, it's actually quite funny. And we see politicians across the world using anti-gay sentiment to portray themselves as protectors of moral values, often for lack of actual policy. So especially in countries like Ghana and Uganda, we see how anti-queer sentiment is being used to drive elections or domestic policy. So to kind of sum up the impacts is that I think AI can easily evolve queer identity and community, but could undermine privacy and safety. Now that all got pretty dark pretty quickly. But not all things are bad. I want to take a moment to recognize that queer people within computer science and AI have come a long way, from Alan Turing being chemically castrated in 1953 to Sam Altman getting married in 2024. There's been a lot of progress for the involvement of especially gay men into computer science and AI. And I'd like to look at the future. My nephew was born in December. Joel Ernst Finzel, that's not him for privacy reasons. And he's going to grow up in a world where AI is completely normal. And he's going to be surprised by us talking about the type of war. And I'd like for us to think a little bit about what we can do in the next couple of years to make sure that his future is going to be a more open one with the help of AI. So there are three angles I want to take. One is accountability, agency, and aspiration. And starting with accountability. Let's hold AI leaders to the highest standards. Let's assume they're brilliant people with incredible economic power, and let's treat them accordingly. That includes demanding transparency where we can. Like we see the Digital Service Act demanding transparency around the use of advertising on social media platforms. That also includes demanding that models are being improved, both with the way data is being fed into a model and the way outputs are being benchmarked against queer guidelines. That could involve stricter policies around the protection of vulnerable minorities, like children, like queer people, like religious minorities. And that would include asking AI leaders to enforce these standards across the world, and not only in markets where governments can threaten them with fines. Next, I want to talk about agency. To get there, we clearly need to involve queer people into AI development. And there's a couple of wonderful organizations working towards this goal at the moment, including Queer in AI, the Algorithmic Justice League, ANL Institute, National LGBTQ Task Force, BADML, Out in Tech, or Helm.net. Is anybody here affiliated to one of those?
I think we have people affiliated with the Algorithmic Justice League.
That's great. We would love to hear what you're working on in the discussion part. You're up, mate. And thirdly, aspiration. Let's start dreaming about a queer future. Generative AI can tell queer stories from rural Bangladesh. digital avatars need not to be bound to any binary gender norms. Large language models can help us correct each other's use of pronouns without us having to worry too much. And I hope that we can all use AI to find a million new ways to express ourselves and to love each other. Thank you.